Hello and welcome everyone to the Master of Arts in Bioethics and Medical Humanities Research Ethics concentration. We're going to start off and kick off our webinar for today. So my name is Sam. I will be more behind the scenes, but our other host today is Dr. Leah Jeanette, and I figured I'd let her say hello to you.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad to have you join us today for our webinar. I'm the Assistant Director of Education here in the Department of Bioethics. I'm also a Senior Research Associate. So I fill lots of different roles, including interacting with those who are interested in our master's program. I teach in the department. I fill administrative roles. I also am a clinical ethicist at one of the hospitals here in Cleveland University Hospitals. So we're so delighted to have you join us, and can't wait to hear from Dr. Michie about our concentration and hear what questions you have for us. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about the agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to go over a few topics before we get into our Q&A. So the first topic is actually talking about our School of Medicine as a whole, and then talking about our actual master's program after that. And then we're going to get into all of the meat and potatoes, that is the research ethics concentration. And then once we complete with all of those pieces, then we're going to talk about what the application process looks like, what our deadlines are, all of those different parts. And then at the end, we will be doing a Q&A. If there are any questions though throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them, because that way we can also see if we can hit those questions as we're going through the presentation as well. But we're going to save the majority of the questions for the end. And how to actually ask Q&As or ask the questions for the Q&A. There we go, words. So if you're on your computer, it'll be at the bottom of your screen. It'll show up like two little chat bubbles that you'll see on like a comic or a manga, and you're going to click that, and then you can type in all of the questions that you have and click enter, and it'll all pop up on our end. Or alternatively, if you're on your phone listening, if you go to the left hand side, click the three little dashes and then click that, it'll show the Q&A button similarly, and you can ask those questions there as well.
So I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. We are delighted to have Dr. Marsha Michie with us today. She's an assistant professor of bioethics, but she's also the director of our research ethics concentration. And Dr. Michie, I will hand it over to you to talk a little bit more about the many roles that you have in our department, in addition to the two that I've listed here, but also the work that you do in our department. Talk a little bit about kind of the work you're doing, your grants, and kind of that a little bit before we kind of move in to talk about Case Western Reserve and the concentration.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Dr. Jeanette. I am thrilled to be here. As it says, I'm the director of the research ethics concentration. So that's a teaching role that I have in the department. I also have done quite a bit of teaching in our department and also in the medical school. I've helped out quite a bit with teaching in the medical school curriculum, but for the master's program, I have taught lots around my two really main interests, which are the ethics and social implications of genetics and genomics, and also reproductive ethics and justice. And so I have a seminar. I don't teach it every year, but I teach some years on reproductive ethics and justice. Most years I co-teach with Dr. Erin Goldenberg, the ethics of genetics and genomics. Then I fill some other roles too, including under the research ethics concentration teaching journal club, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. I have a lot of research going on right now, which is keeping me quite busy. So I have two large grants from the National Human Genome Research Institute. One is called the PREPARE study, and that's about how parents use genomic information to prepare to be a parent of a child with a genetic condition. People who decide to continue a pregnancy, what do they do with that information, and how can we help them to use that information to benefit their family. And then the other grant that I got fairly recently with Dr. Ruth Farrell at the Cleveland Clinic, who's an OBGYN and bioethicist, is called the FAIRER study. And that study is to look toward the future of genomic interventions that might take place during pregnancy or might result in pregnancy. Things like CRISPR, things like altering the microbiome of the vaginal-uterine canal, things like epigenetic interventions, and to think about the risk-benefit analysis of those and how to create a good ethical framework for that to help IRBs review research, to help researchers think about how to structure these trials that may be taking place in the next few years and probably will be taking place very soon. So that's my two big projects. I also work on other issues around health disparities in cancer, health disparities in infant and maternal morbidity and mortality, and other things that are going on. I have had my hands in a little bit of COVID research recently, and I just got finished co-publishing a book called Born Well, Prenatal Genetics and the Future of Having Children with my co-editor, Megan Elise, and there's lots of great chapters in there from people who are very knowledgeable in that field. So I think that's a summary of more or less what I do. A lot of research right now, but also a lot of teaching, and I really love teaching in the department and being the director of the Research Ethics Concentration, which is a really fun area to be in.
So I think the place for us to start is to talk a little bit about Case Western Reserve University and the School of Medicine. As Dr. Michie mentioned, our department itself is positioned within the School of Medicine, but that also means that our faculty does teaching within the School of Medicine. Our School of Medicine is ranked #1 in Ohio, and we're the top 25 in the US. And there's other statistics we could talk about as well. But Dr. Michie, do you want to talk a little bit more about kind of the School of Medicine and kind of your experience of kind of, what you've done so far and in kind of the position we're in with this medical research that we've participated in?
Sure. I have not been here nearly as long as Dr. Jeanette. I got here in the fall of 2017. So I'm a bit of a newcomer to Cleveland in some ways, and to Case. And what I've learned is that Case is a really vibrant community of researchers and educators and students. And I have developed so many great collaborations for research here. One of the most interesting things for me that happened when COVID hit was that all of a sudden, all these researchers who had a lot of interest that might have been just a little bit adjacent to COVID and pandemics, just really pivoted very quickly and launched into gear and formed a coalition across the whole Cleveland, Northeast Ohio area. And Case really anchored that. And we developed work groups around COVID. I got involved in a couple of different pilot grants that we came up with, one on how COVID has changed research. So you might think about the ways that we typically do research, where we would go into, say, a hospital and recruit people and sign people up, and COVID made that really impossible. And so thinking about how research governance and how research itself was being conducted during the pandemic, that was a really important one. And then the other, just one that's fascinating to me, and we're still analyzing the data from this, was called the neighborhood study. And we looked at 8 different neighborhoods across Cleveland to think about the ways that people were sort of uniquely vulnerable to a pandemic, depending on whether they lived, for example, in a place with lots of retail areas, whether they lived in a place with lots of congregate housing, where grandparents and grandchildren were living together. So there was interesting kinds of vulnerability around who goes to school and who gets social services and those kinds of things. So that was a great project. I think that the medical school is really innovative. The model of medical education that we have is really innovative, and we have been a really vital part of that in the bioethics department. Bioethics is fully integrated into the medical curriculum in a way that it is not in some other medical schools. So I've loved that. And then in terms of research, we have some great research centers here. We have a really terrific cancer center that does great research. We have a really active genetics department, which is a big interest for me. We have a terrific anthropology department at Case Western that's exclusively focused on medical anthropology. So they are very close collaborators and many times with research that we do in the bioethics department. And then of course, in the bioethics department, we also have a great medical humanities program. So we collaborate with all kinds of folks across campus, and there is a medical humanities pathway in the medical school itself for medical students. So I have really, really enjoyed getting to know Case a lot better, and I'm still learning, but I think there's a lot of really exciting and innovative things going on here, and lots and lots of funded research. So if you're interested in research ethics, it's a great place to be for that reason.
Yeah, those are all excellent examples. And I'll add, you know, the School of Medicine also partners with those who are in the law school. And as you mentioned, like the anthropology department, or those who are in the social work programs. And so those are also very high ranking programs, and, you know, grant funded and others. And so, you know, while we're located in the School of Medicine across Case, it's amazing to see, you know, the collaboration across the schools as well. All right, so I will keep us moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about bioethics and medical humanities. So, you know, the question we often get asked, Dr. Michie, is why study bioethics and medical humanities? And if someone were to ask you that question, and I know there's a couple answers here, but can you elaborate on answering that question? Why study it?
Well, you know, it's probably pretty obvious to anyone who has even a little bit of interest in bioethics and medical humanities, what a central role medicine and the research that leads to medical advancement has in all societies across the world. Medical jobs are probably one of the most quickly growing and really important positions in our society. And when we have that kind of emphasis on biomedical research and practice and the technologies that make it possible and the people that drive it forward, there's a lot of quick changes happening. There's a lot of advancements that take place, and sometimes they come at us very quickly. So we have to think about whether we should be holding things back, whether we should pull the reins, whether we should intervene in very subtle ways to slightly change the way things are implemented, to think about, for example, communities that have been historically underserved by biomedical research and practice. We know that the vast majority of clinical trials have been conducted on very privileged populations. They tend to be European descent populations. They tend to be highly educated populations. And then when we try to translate those discoveries into medical practice, we run up against all these disparities that we didn't account for in research because of the way the research was conducted. And so not only do we need to think about respect for persons, which is a classic sort of bioethics concern in research, in that we don't want to exploit people, but we also want to make sure that we involve people in research, because that can lead to injustice later down the line if we have a disparity in who's actually participating in research. And all of those things end up becoming part of our policy and our practice. And when we say policy, we think sort of often about the big P policy, laws that take place at the federal level or the state level. But policy is really important at the local level too. Institutions make policies that really shape people's lives. Hospitals make decisions. Individual IRBs or research ethics committees make decisions. that literally, you know, are life and death for people. And when those policies and practices are not informed by bioethical principles and the kinds of things that we do in bioethics and medical humanities, they can leave a lot of people out and they can have a lot of blind spots. And we're constantly working to see what we're missing, who's not at the table, whose voice isn't there, and how we can incorporate a broader swath of the public in thinking about how to move medicine forward in these ways.
So to build off of that, what are the ethical issues in then biomedical research and regulations? And why do those things matter?
Well, of course, I mean, just as I touched on, certainly IRBs and research ethics committees have to follow regulations, things that get passed down from the federal government, things that are enforced by funding institutions like the National Institutes of Health. And researchers have to know these things. Local institutions have to know these things. But then things change, you know, and I'll just give you an example from a field that I'm really well versed in, and that's genetics. So right now, your genetic code is not classified by the federal common rule, the rule that governs human research. Your genetic code, the code of your DNA, is not classified as identifiable health information. If your name isn't attached to it or some other identifier isn't attached to it, it's considered de-identified. But what we know from genetics research is that it doesn't actually take that much of your genetic code and comparing it against readily available public databases to actually re-identify you pretty quickly. And so the federal government is trying to figure out, well, what do we do about this? How do we enable research to take place in ways that respect privacy when it's so easy to re-identify people? It's a really thorny problem. And so ethical issues in biomedical research, of course, we're thinking about things like respecting people's autonomy, respecting their ability to make decisions about whether to participate. We want to think about their privacy and their confidentiality. We want to think about justice, as I said, for underserved populations and how to involve communities in research that maybe have experienced all kinds of marginalization and injustice in the past, but now could be experiencing injustice if they're left out. So there's lots of ways that we have to think about this. And in the end, we often, it often comes down to weighing risks and benefits. And that's very contextual. You always have to think about where you are, who you're talking about, what the technology is like, what's it going to be in 5 years or 10 years. And how do we enact that on the ground in very community-oriented and specific ways. So it can get very, very, very complicated very fast. And when I say at the ethics of research, I'm thinking not just about research that takes place at the bench or research that takes place in clinical trials, but how we translate those research innovations into clinical practice, and everything all the way up to when a doctor in an exam room with a patient is prescribing that intervention. All of that is this kind of gray area between research and clinical practice that we think very hard about.
Yeah, here's some examples of some of these types of research.
Yeah, so these are some things that we've been doing in Journal Club. We'll talk about that in a moment, but Journal Club really tries to look at what's kind of current and hot issues in this area. And you can see these are things that largely our students have said that is important to them, and they pick out topics. And you see they're interested in all kinds of things around community engagement, around privacy, around new technologies like gene-edited embryos and babies. And the kinds of topics that they choose are really indicative of what's going on right now in research ethics and regulation.
So the question that we usually get next then is, so studying bioethics and medical humanities is clearly important. Understanding how research the ethical issues in research and of research and regulations is really crucial. So then how does that help a career path? How can that enhance someone's professional career? And what would you say to how would you respond to that?
Well, you are so in touch with all the students and know so often where they go after they leave us. So you can probably add to what I'm going to say, but people who are very interested in research ethics, in particular, our students who do their research ethics concentration, they often go on either to careers in research where they become researchers themselves, but with this really powerful knowledge that then they can incorporate into their projects. Or sometimes they end up in the infrastructure that supports research. They might work for an IRB, a research ethics committee. They might work dealing with policy issues around the ethics of research, even things like conflicts of interest or how we regulate research and researchers. Sometimes we have recently had a student who was a dual degree student in law and bioethics, and she incorporated research ethics and law together to do some really interesting policy assessments internationally with in her next position. And so I think there's lots of great ways you can incorporate this. Some people, of course, with research ethics concentration still go on to be medical practitioners, doctors and nurses and so forth. It just depends on what your interest is, but often having that background in research ethics then gives you this sort of extra hat you can put on in your next role so that people might be able to mine that expertise.
Absolutely. And as you can see here, students often come with a specific professional career or end goal in mind, but not every student does. So they might even use this program as a way to discern what the next step might be. And that can include exploring through a research ethics concentration, because that's their area of interest. And so, this world of bioethics and medical humanities, and specifically our master's program, which we're going to talk about in detail next, can really help with that discernment. So to talk about our master's program, we're in the midst of our 26th year. It's hard to believe we've been around for so long. It's 2 semesters when it's completed full time. Some significant highlights. So we have personal advising for each student, so we can help really guide and customize your curriculum around your goals. And close to half of those 30 credits are going to be electives. We have our clinical ethics rotations. It's 160 hours in our local hospitals here in Cleveland. We have short-term study abroad electives. We have 2 concentrations that are optional. Not every student does a concentration, but if you choose to, one is medicine, society, and culture. And then, of course, the research ethics, which we'll talk about in detail next. We have student assistantships that offset tuition. And then we also have many dual degree options for students as well. So Dr. Michie, you want to talk a little bit about the details of how the research ethics concentration works in terms of courses and the practicum and opportunities for students?
Absolutely. We were just showing you all those interesting topics that our students wanted to talk about. And those are all sort of leftover posters from past sessions of Research Ethics Journal Club. Journal Club is a student-led course that takes place over the year. And what's interesting is the way that Journal Club works with the Research Ethics and Regulation core course. So the core course, that's your foundational stuff, right? That's the history of research ethics and regulation. That's what's happening right now. You're figuring out what research ethics is really all about. But then at the same time, you get to come to Journal Club. It's very light, very fun, and we get together and students choose topics that are really new and current and exciting to talk about, and to apply what they're learning in the core course to new and different issues. Then our students do choose electives that are related to research ethics, and there's a broad number of those. A lot of courses combine research ethics with other issues. And then the really exciting thing that most of our students are so excited about is the research ethics practicum. And what we do is in the spring, rather than doing more clinical hours, because you do all these clinical hours in the fall, and then you can keep doing them in the spring. But if you're a research ethics concentration student, instead of doing that, you apply those 80 hours to a practicum, and you work with Dr. Sana Liu in our department, who is the chair of the Case Western IRB Research Ethics Committee. And she has great connections all around the area, and she'll connect you up with something that's related to your interest, maybe working in the IRB office, or maybe working with a faculty member on a project that has to do with research ethics, and you get involved in that research. You might get involved in helping to write a paper. And we have students who've done lots of fascinating things with their research ethics practicum.
Here are just a few examples of some of the practicum experiences that students have had over the years. As Dr. Michie said, there's so many ways that students have been able to be involved in the practicum, and it's an amazing opportunity for students.
I totally agree. It's the thing that students often get most excited about in the concentration, and I see that policy, that word policy pops up on this page, and it's all over the place. Research ethics often is a big shaper of policy. So if you're interested in making real world changes, research ethics is a great place to be. You could end up helping to write new policies for our local institutions, or help to shape a policy recommendations in a paper, or a white paper perhaps, with a faculty member.
Yeah. So before I move us on to kind of wrapping us up, do you have any other final thoughts about the research ethics concentration or the master's program that we would want prospective students to know as they're kind of thinking about everything we've shared?
This is a terrific intensive program, and students sometimes come in thinking that they really have to do a concentration. Absolutely not true. It's a really great intensive program. Even if you just do the basic program, there's lots to do and lots of flexibility to shape it to your interests. But if research ethics is a particular interest to you, then the research ethics concentration is a great opportunity, because for one thing, you can only do the practicum if you're in the research ethics concentration. We don't have enough slots for people who aren't already in the concentration. And then of course, the other concentration, medicine, society, and culture, is another great opportunity. We sometimes have students do both of them, which is taxing, but we have some really ambitious students who've done it and done it very, very well.
So for those of you who are interested and want to put in an application for our master's program, we would highly encourage you to do so. A completed application includes transcripts from all undergrad and grad programs, a statement of purpose. What we're looking for in that statement of purpose is your interest in bioethics and medical humanities, and how do you see that fitting into your career path. And that can even include you're still figuring it out. We're open to students who are in the midst of figuring it out. And to some respect, we're all still figuring it out. We're also looking for a CV, resume, and that completed application package, and 2 letters of recommendation, including one from a faculty or professor. Once we have a completed application, someone from our admissions committee reviews, and someone else will interview you. And typically we can have a decision rendered within 2 to 3 weeks, provided that it is a complete application, including those letters of recommendation. Those usually take the longest to come in. I will say, coming up pretty soon, we will have a university shutdown between Christmas and New Year's. And so we won't be reviewing and interviewing during that time period. So there will be a little bit of a delay for rendering decisions. But other than that, typically 2 to 3 weeks, we're pretty good on that time frame. I do want to highlight just quickly our student assistantships. So these are highly competitive, but they are wonderful opportunities for students to be involved in research, teaching, or administrative activities with faculty and staff in our department. They are both need and or merit-based, and they are opportunities for students to get involved. But when students are awarded these, they receive a partial tuition waiver, anywhere from $3,000 to $12,000. In order to be eligible, you do have to submit a master's program application, and these applications will likely open towards the end of January. And so we would encourage you to get your applications for the master's program in so that you can submit your student assistantship applications in for these. These are also a great way, as you can see, to get involved in research for those who are interested to see what some of the research projects that are going on in the department. I know, Dr. Michie, you've worked with students as student assistants on some of your projects.
Absolutely. And, I have students who come to research meetings and see, kind of how the sausage is made, right? The inner workings of a research project. I've had a student help me analyze survey data and help me create posters for national conferences. I've had students do detailed literature reviews. I have a student right now in one of my projects who's probably going to be helping us code interview data from experts on reproductive ethics and genomics. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And so we just love having students on these projects. They learn a lot. We learn a lot from them. They have great perspectives.
So lastly, just to cover some deadlines. So the next deadline that's coming up, is March 1st. So if you are a current junior at CASE undergrad, the integrated graduate studies deadline is March 1st. So please keep that in mind. If you have more questions about that, please reach out to us. Our priority 2 deadline is going to be May 15th. So if you are interested in applying for our student assistantships, you need to have your master's program application submitted by May 15th. And then the student assistantship application would be due June 1st. As I said, the student assistantship applications will open sometime late January. So just highlighting those deadlines. Our final deadline to, for a fall 22 start, I have a typo there, is going to be August 1st. So keep that in mind, and classes start August 22. So we'll take any questions you guys may have. I know we're over by just a few minutes, but if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the Q&A. We're happy to answer them at this time. Or you can always email us, bioethics@case.edu. We're happy to answer your questions via email, or we can set up a time to have a one-on-one meeting or a phone call and answer your more specific questions as well. So while we're waiting to see if there's any questions coming in, Dr. Michie, any final thoughts?
Well, it is a real joy to work with research ethics students in this program. And having an interest in research ethics doesn't mean you're not interested in clinical ethics or in social medicine, medical humanities. Oftentimes, as you were saying, we often have students who come in and either they kind of think they know what they want, but they change their mind over the course of a year, or they're not quite sure what they want to do. They know they want to do something related to the theory, but they're not quite sure. And they make those decisions, or at least make good progress toward those decisions in their year with us. Because what you get to do is take all these fascinating classes, learn a lot about a huge diversity of issues that are related to ethics and social issues around medicine and medical research, and maybe learn about things that you didn't even know existed. Certainly, we've had students tell us, I thought I was interested in this topic, but then I learned about this other thing, and now that's all I want to do all day long. So that's always fun to see those light bulbs pop on and how excited people are about learning.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. There's so many different areas within bioethics and medical humanities. And so there's lots to explore, and you can be interested in more than one area. Absolutely. So I'm not seeing any additional questions come in. So I will just say thank you to those who have been in attendance. Thank you to Dr. Michie. Thank you to Sam for joining us. Like I said, if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us bioethics at case.edu.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dr. Jeanette. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.